Well, in my classes, what I try to focus on are the basic principles of figure drawing as I was taught and as I think are important to leading to other aspects of art, which are gesture, action, proportion, shape relationships, mass conception. And I'm saying it in a kind of order because that's how I think of it. I think that the first thing that you attack and what I encourage my students to do in the class is gestural understanding of what the model is doing, okay, in terms of the rhythm and action of the pose and an expression of that, because ultimately that's what they're trying to express, I would assume. They're trying to express the particular gesture of a model in a particular pose. So you start with that. Then what's very important in representational work is, of course, a sense of proportion, volume, and shape relationships. And shape probably being more important on two-dimensional work, because you're basically thinking about a silhouette of the figure against the space around it. So, and ultimately when you're creating a painting, a composition, you're dealing with arrangements of shapes, color, value, but you're starting with shapes. Shapes are an important part of it. So by working on the figure, by drawing regularly, you're dealing with all of these principles and themes. And so I don't look at it as much from an anatomical point of view, although when I started figure drawing, I thought that that's what it was, because my heroes were all great anatomists. My heroes were Michelangelo, my heroes were the Renaissance artists, my heroes were other sculptors, and Rubens, and where the anatomy is just exploding. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that anatomy is the least of it on a certain level. It's more these bigger principles of gesture, shape relationship, proportional relationship, form. Then the anatomy basically sits on top, almost like a decorative element. Now, learning anatomy, we touch on anatomy a lot because it helps understand the structure. So I teach anatomy more from the point of view of not to make a more finished drawing, but in terms of how to better understand the underlying structure that the flesh and muscles are sitting on top of. So it's a lot based on an understanding of that kind of anatomical thinking, which leads to mass conception, essentially. So a lot of what we do is basically understanding what you're observing and how to decode, essentially, the observations that you're making of the model. How do you break down all those complicated little bumps and lumps and bones and whatnot, how do, and vagaries of light? How do you simplify those into the bigger structural statements that then you can then build on? So a lot of it is observation and then simplifying, observing so that you understand it conceptually, and then basically drawing the concept. Does that make sense? A lot of it has to do with observing so intensely that you understand it on a conceptual level. See, so it's based on observation, but it's also based on concept. It's not just copying exactly what you see, because a lot of people get confused with that kind of thinking, where observe nature, observe nature. Well, yes, you have to observe nature, but you also have to be able to decode and simplify what you're observing in nature. You don't draw every leaf on a tree. So it's the same thing with the figure. And it's always remarkable how you look at an old master drawing, and it's actually, early on, it's fairly easy to copy an old master drawing and make it look pretty darn good. And you say, wow, I've achieved that, but now try to do that from a live model. And you realize all the decisions that the master was making that you're not aware of until you actually try to do it yourself.